Hello, and welcome to a spicy episode of the Inside Exchange. In today's episode, we'll be discussing how to achieve your goals. My name is Brendan Nago.
I'm Colin. And what I want to first start off with is when most people think about achieving their goals, right? They think about setting the high goals. Think about like how setting high goals is everything. Like there's a famous quote where it's like, you aim for the moon, you shoot for the moon, and then if you fail, you still be among the stars. It's a good quote, but the problem is that it's not about how high you set the goal. It's about like what you do every day to achieve that goal. And the way to get success is through the product of daily habits. There's no overnight transformations, no groundbreaking transformations. It's your day-to-day habits that determine the success you end up getting.
Very good points. Things don't happen overnight. Like most of your guys' goals are big stuff. Like if your goals can all be achieved in like one day, then you aren't dreaming among the moons. You're dreaming like 1 foot away. Like that's not a real dream. You gotta like think big. And then when you think big, it's about consistency, right? Like it's showing up every day to work towards those goals. If you just show up like once a month or inconsistently go on and off like many of you guys do, then that will you won't reach your goals.
Yeah, it's like if you were to practice like 5 hours in one day versus 1 hour for 5 days, the amount of success you end up getting from 1 hour from 5 days would be exponentially greater than the amount you get from 5 days. So I'll talk about this interesting notion of like getting 1% better per day. And what a lot of people don't realize is that if you get just 1% better a day, it doesn't sound like very much, 1%. After a year, you'd be like about like 200 times off. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but you'd be way better than you were when you started. But if you were to get 1% worse per day, after a year, you would actually be at basically zero. Like if you start from one, you'd basically be at zero. You basically be start over, which is insane. And just think about like how small the amount of improvement you need per day to actually make like a big difference in your life and achieve your goals.
It's very interesting to think about. Like if you did manage to get 1% better every day at everything, you could become. If you're able to maintain that, you would be the best at anything you did. Honestly, it,
Yeah. Now I want to go on to some advice for how to build these habits. The first thing you have to realize is that the habits you build are based on your identity. So, for example, if you say, I'm terrible at math or I'm always late, well, you will always be late and you will always be bad at math. So, if you want to fix your habits, you have to start by fixing your identity, like changing your identity. Because if you think of yourself as, if you highly regard yourself as like a smart person, you act smartly. You try to find ways to learn and communicate well. So, yeah.
yeah. Like every day, when you walk through the day, you're telling yourself a story, right? I heard this somewhere. You're telling yourself a story, a mental story of who you are, right? And you end up living the story that you mentally tell yourself. Like if I tell myself I am good at math, then I'll probably study a lot at math and I'll actually be good at it, right? But if you tell yourself, oh, I'm an addict that does like absolutely nothing in my life. Well, of course you're gonna be an addict that does nothing with your life because that's what you're telling yourself you are. Thoughts are one of the most powerful things humans have, and you are your thoughts. Like if you think about it, at the end of the day, you're just a body with thoughts, and the thoughts control everything about your reality, everything about what happens to you, everything about what goals you achieve, and it all comes down to thoughts for pretty much everything.
Yeah, so I'm not just pulling it up. It's like if you get 1% better each day for a year, you literally end up at 37.78 if you start at 1, which is basically means you're 37 times better than you were when you started. That's just absolutely insane. And I like to have this is like an analogy where like with earthquakes, an earthquake is small buildup over time. It's like a tiny, tiny buildup over time. Yet they can cause huge destruction. So this is what it actually looks like with success. It seems like it's overnight because of all the work that's put in before, and then you suddenly have that like growth, and that's like what people see, and that's what people think they take away, but that's not actually true. It's actually like the small things you do every day that actually end up creating that big outcome. And one of the main stoppers of success is actually bad habits. So in order to, and like we first have to understand how habits work. So habits are a cue and then an action and then a reward. So when when your body sees a cue, it then does an action and then it expects a reward. For example, like when monkeys are trained, they like press like a lever and then they get like a reward from it, and then the action is like hitting the lever. That's what your body does. So basically, if you change the action to the cue, you basically change your habit entirely. And habits are in fact so strong because it's what our body has done to preserve our energy. Because if you can automate something, you need a lot less energy in order to actually like do that same function. So if
Okay, so about habits a little bit more. So I read somewhere it takes roughly like 2 weeks to get accustomed to a habit, right? So it's all about the consistency. Like in between those 2 weeks, it's not going to be an automatic response. It's going to be, you're going to have to fight through your prefrontal cortex in order to perform such activities, right? But after the 2 weeks, it becomes an automatic response. Like, oh, I didn't practice tennis today. The world's going to everything's wrong versus like if you just like are like practicing tennis like every now and then, you won't care at all.
yeah, so habits actually end up becoming so strong that you can end up doing something without even realizing you do it. For example, let's say every single day you put your computer in your backpack before you go to school. Well, you might like come to school and be like, oh shoot, I forgot my backpack. And you look in your backpack and you realize your computer is there. Which is like it's just like how a body like adapts. So this is how strong habits are. And if you have these good habits, they become incredibly powerful because you don't have to think about doing them. You just do it. So for example, if you just come back home from school or something and you want to like study for like an exam, you can make the habit where the moment you come back home, you start studying, and then that's just you don't have to think about it. You don't spend any energy, no effort. You just start studying, and that's like how these kind of habits you can build to increase your success.
Earlier this episode, we mentioned overnight success, right? And I want to touch a little bit more upon that topic. Okay, so sometimes he's as he said, it seems like success is overnight, but you got to understand what actually happened. Okay, most of these overnight successes, there's a crap ton of failure involved. There's crap ton of mistakes, and it looks like it's overnight success because on paper it was overnight. But if you think about it, it was a ton of experience that built up to that, of failing constantly and constantly. Okay, like it's always like boom, 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 work a little bit, and then you're a little bit better. And then over time, as you get a little bit better, it doesn't look like you got better. And then one day, it just clicks. After all that work, it just clicks, and then you actually become better.
Yeah. So now you guys are probably wondering, how are we gonna actually build these habits and change the habits? So one technique is called habit stacking, where basically you do an action and then because it's a habit already, you stack another habit on top of that, so it's easier to develop. So for example, let's say you were to brush your teeth, and then right after you brush your teeth, you want to develop like a reading habit. So right after you brush your teeth, you just immediately start reading. So we already have the habit of brushing your teeth, and then right after that, you just go read. So that's a way to easily develop your habits. Another way is to reduce like the barriers to doing something. So for example, let's say you really want to study. Instead of saying, oh, I'm gonna have this massive study session, or I'm gonna study for 3 hours, you're gonna likely procrastinate before that because your body's like, oh, I don't want to study for 3 hours. Let's put it off. But if you were to say, I'm gonna study for 5 minutes, well, 5 minutes is super easy, right? You basically don't have to do anything to study for 5 minutes. So your body's gonna have a lot less burden, a lot less procrastination, a lot less of like, oh, I don't want to do this. You're gonna actually start wanting to do it because it's just 5 minutes. It's super easy.
I'd like to touch a little bit more on that 5 minute topic. So when you tell yourself you're going for 5 minutes, you've reduced the barriers to entry. And the thing is, once we start a task, we don't like to stop it. You can, like many of you guys have heard of getting in the zone and like a state of flow, right? And basically what that means is that once you're in for 5 minutes, you might be able to continue after those 5 minutes. Like it's not a guarantee, but the hardest part of an activity is starting it. Once you start it, you can easily just continue to progress and continue to work through, say, that book for way more than 5 minutes. You could probably work for hours even if you started for only 5 minutes. It's just that initial activation energy in order to begin a task that drives most people with the most difficulty.
Yeah, I really like that point. But another thing you can also do with this technique is you can actually apply it to bad habits. So for example, let's say you always watch the TV. Well, if you're sitting on the couch, the TV's right, and the TV remote is right next to you, there's literally nothing stopping you from just taking the remote and turning on the TV. But let's say the remote was on the other side of the house behind like a locked door, and then your parent has the key. So you have to ask them for the key and then go to the other side of the house in order to get the TV remote and then turn on the TV. In which situation are you going to be less likely to watch the TV? Well, obviously the one where you have to get the key first. So you can also use this technique in order to break bad habits as well.
Yes, by increasing the activation energy for harder tasks or tasks we want to get rid of, like bad habits. Then we're able to possibly remove that if our brain does not want to go through the troubles of getting into that bad habit. And then once you start that bad habit again, though, like watching TV, you can get stuck for hours. But if you just like, if you added even like a minute of like random stuff you have to do to get on the TV, then you may not even go on the TV in the first place and end up in that loop.
Yeah, and you can also like put stuff that you'd rather do like in more easy accessible places. For example, instead of like a TV remote, right? You could put the TV remote in like that hard to get place, and then you have like let's say your violin or something that you really want to play. You could have it like right next to you on the couch. So when you're sitting on the couch and you're super tired, you think to yourself, "Oh, what do I do now?" Instead of reaching for the TV remote, which is not going to be there anymore, you just reach for the violin instinctively, and then you just start playing it, and then that's how you like get rid of bad habits and build good ones.
Very good points, Colin.
All right, so now a lot of people also would like to talk about time management. People think that, oh, in order to get success, we need to have time management. So a lot of like this super famous technique is called the Pomodoro technique, where basically you do 15 minutes of work and then you like rest for 5 minutes or something. It's usually like in that kind of ratio. And in order to do this technique, I would recommend buying a real clock because usually when you have a real clock, it feels like someone's watching you. So you're more likely to actually follow through with it. And yeah, so
I'd like to touch a little bit more upon this Pomodoro technique. So it's not just the Pomodoro technique, and it's not just like some people think you have to do the Pomodoro technique. It's exactly 25 minutes, 5 minutes, and you keep doing that like for all of your work, right? But it's more about the consistency that the Pomodoro technique generates, right? Like if you're in there and you work for 25 minutes and the clock goes off, but you're like still locked in, there's no reason to not continue to work for like a few more minutes.
Mhm. Yeah, another problem with the Pomodoro technique is during those 5 minutes, if you consume high dopamine content, right, like social media, YouTube, that kind of stuff, it's going to be a lot harder to focus on your lower dopamine work. So what a lot of people recommend doing is actually, if during a 5 minute break, you could literally just stare at a wall because when you do like a super low dopamine action or activity, and then go back to your work, it makes your work seem exciting. It's a very common like a study where people were put in a room with literally nothing to do except with like a thing to shock themselves. What researchers found was that people were shocking themselves because they were so bored. So if you make yourself in that same boredom, this work would be the thing that you'd want to do. You'd be excited about doing the work.
Yes, the work would generate dopamine, and that's what we want. We want stuff to be able to generate dopamine, even if they're a very low dopamine activity, like doing math homework, for example. So another techniques that I've heard of is like 57 minutes, 17 minutes, or something like that. I can't remember the exact time ratios, but the point of that time cycle is to keep you in flow for a longer state of time. But truly, it's more about the consistency. Like you could take these time management stuff with a grain of salt. Just think about how you're gonna start doing the task, because once you start, it becomes a lot harder to stop. Another thing is, like Colin said, you probably want to avoid those high dopamine activities if you do take a break, or when you do take a break, because everybody eventually needs a break at some point. You want to avoid those high dopamine activities and do like more natural stuff, such as consuming a snack maybe, or taking a nap, or staring at a wall, like you said.
Yeah. And also, I want to touch on like, I lost my train of thought.
Okay, now I would like to bring the discussion more towards a plan of action towards your goals, right? Like many of us are aware of the SMART goal setting acronym, right? And the SMART goal setting acronym, I'm just going to look it up.
It's like where you like make goals that are like reachable, but also they push you at the same time.
Yeah, you need to put yourself in a state of a flow where it's not too hard and it's not too easy. Like
And a lot of common pitfalls that people have with setting goals is that usually when they achieve something, they have like a short-lived happiness, and then they go set a new goal right after. So they don't really have like, so as people always think like, oh, I'm gonna start enjoying life like once I reach this goal, but it's never gonna happen.
Like a SMART goal is one that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Let's talk a little bit more about those different points. So a specific goal is one that it's clear and obvious what you're defining. Like some people have goals, but those goals are cluttered and it doesn't exactly have an endpoint. Like there's no clear specificity on what they want to achieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you have to say about that, Colin?
Like, for example, if you want to say, oh, I want to work more on my physical, like, if you don't set like a strict statistic, like, I want to gain 2 pounds of muscle or something,
Yeah, I want to.
it's going to be hard to measure yourself and hard to know how or like whether or not you're on track to achieving your goals. Then, usually, if you were to set like a vague goal, like, I'm going to study more, you're probably not going to study more because you have no idea how to actually track yourself and measure yourself.
Okay, yeah, and that touches on like the second point, which is measurable about how to stay on track for your progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like every goal, there should be a clear path on how you're gonna do it, and like checkpoints and that type of thing, where you have like minor goals within the SMART goal, right? Where you have checkpoints and you're trying to hit those checkpoints, and those are easily measurable too. And then it should obviously be achievable. Like if you set a goal that's way outside of your capabilities, like I want to be able to run a 2-minute mile. You're never gonna get there. Like you need you need to be able to feel the success. You know what I mean, Colin?
Mm-hmm.
It's not success if you just keep trying to chase stuff that is out of your reach and it's completely unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
And then we talk about how the goals have to be relevant, right? Like if you're just setting goals to set goals, you're not gonna achieve them. You have to set goals that you actually want. Like it's relevant to what your objectives, and as we were talking about identity in the start of the episode, to your identity and the story you tell yourself, right? Like these goals should be intertwined with that. If you're just setting goals that have nothing to do with you, you're probably not going to follow through with it, right? And then the last thing is time bound, right? You have to work on a clock. If you're just like, if there's no sense of urgency, why would you do anything when you can do it 20 years from now, right? Or as some people say, oh, I can do the work tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, there's always tomorrow. but if you keep telling yourself that, there isn't always tomorrow.
Yeah, I would like that point because that's how procrastinators think. Like there's a TED Talk about, like, I think everyone's watched it at some point. It's like about the monkey, and then it's like you plan out your work ahead and then you realize that, oh, there's always tomorrow. So then you just wait your work for, like, put your work off, and then at the last day before it's due, some people just have to absolutely grind out, and that's very bad for their mental health, physical health. Yeah, like people still think it's fine. They don't do anything about it because the thing is, building these habits and doing these things are hard. That's why not everyone can say, "Oh, I have success," because this is inherently hard. You have to realize that. So don't get frustrated with yourself when you're trying to change your habits, when you're trying to build new habits, break bad habits. These are things that the fact that you're even trying to do them, it's like most people don't even try at all. So the fact that you're even trying to do them, the fact that you're even here listening to this, shows that you're actually trying to improve yourself, and you should like give yourself a pat on the back for that.
Oh, so another thing I want to talk about is people consuming, instead of actually doing the work, them consuming content on how to do the work, like watching videos on how to end procrastination or podcast episodes on goal setting when what they actually have to do is get the work done. Like, what do you have to say about that, Colin?
Yeah, so instead of being like a person who's thinking about how to do something, the most important thing is actually applying. You have to apply what you say, what you think, what you consume. Most importantly, consume, because if you learn all this information, like you're learning a lot of this information right now, but then you never go on to use it, what's going to change in your life? Absolutely nothing. So you have to actually take this and just apply it right now. Just write stuff down right now. Think about it, make an action plan, and follow through with it right now. Because if you don't follow through with it right now, the probability that you're actually going to do it just diminishes over time.
Yeah, like I've seen self-help YouTube videos, and almost all of them tell you to stop watching the video and get to work, right? But most people that are just doom scrolling through those don't actually follow through. So I want you, after watching this episode, to jot down a few SMART goals you have and start to take small actionable steps, as we talked about, and start changing your habits to what you want, okay? You could watch however many podcasts and videos out there, but at the end of the day, it's you that has to make the decisions.
Yeah, I think that's like a great place to end the episode. Thank you for watching, and this is the Thai Podcast.